Before the sky had a name, before the earth had a name, before anything that exists had been called anything at all, there were two things, and two things only, and they were mixed together like salt water and fresh water meeting at the mouth of a river, neither fully one thing, neither fully the other. The first was Apsu, the freshwater deep. He was vast and still, the underground ocean that ancient Mesopotamia knew lay beneath the earth itself, feeding the rivers and the wells with its quiet, steady pressure. The second was Tiamat. Tiamat was the salt water, the ocean, not a body of water, the way we mean a body of water, not something you could look at from a shore and call the sea. She was a primordial salt ocean in its entirety, the water that circled and underlay and overwhelmed the known world, the original substance from which everything that would ever exist had not yet been separated out. She was not in the ocean. She was the ocean. She was not worshipped as the ocean. She was the ocean, conscious, ancient, and older than any name. Together, Apsu and Tiamat gave rise to the gods, not through any act of deliberate creation, simply by being, by their waters mingling, by the silt that formed where fresh water met salt, by the slow process of existence generated more existence, the way a river delta builds an entire landscape by simply flowing long enough. The first gods rose from the mingling of their primordial waters, and then those gods gave rise to more gods and more, generation after generation, filling the world that was not yet fully a world with divine beings who were young and loud and restless in the way that young things always are. And that was when the trouble started. The gods who could not be quiet. The young gods made noise. This sounds trivial, and it is not. In the ancient cosmology preserved in the Babylonian creation text we call the Enuma Elish, named for its first words, which mean when on high, the noise the young gods made is a central event that sets every other event in the entire story into motion. They danced, and they shouted, and they moved, and they generated the kind of turbulent, chaotic energy that young things generate simply by existing, and the sound of them reverberated through primordial waters, disturbing the stillness at the very foundation of the world. Apsu, who was old and still by nature, could not sleep. He lay in his vastness, listening to the noise of his own descendants overhead, and grew first irritable and then furious and then resolute. He went to Tiamat and proposed simply that they kill the young gods, all of them, their own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the entire proliferating divine generation that had come from their mingling wiped out, so that the original silence could be restored. And here's the first extraordinary moment in this story. Tiamat refused. The old texts preserve her refusal, and they preserve it in terms that are worth sitting with. She told Apsu that what he was proposing was a destruction of what they themselves had made. She was disturbed by the noise, too. The texts make this clear, but something in her resisted the idea of unmade what their union had produced. She was a primordial ocean, but she was also, in some layer of meaning the text carries alongside the narrative, a mother, and she was not yet ready to kill what she had made simply because it was inconvenient. Apsu proceeded anyway. He gathered his own vizier, a minister named Mummu, and the two of them began to plan the murder of the younger gods without Tiamat's blessing and without her help. But the younger gods had a spy, or perhaps simply a god wise enough to sense what was being planned in the deep waters below. His name was Ea, also called Enki, whom you may remember from the story of Inanna's descent, the most clever and compassionate of the older generation of gods, and Ea learned of Apsu's plan before it could be carried out. He worked a spell of such depth and power that it reached down into the freshwater deep and cast Apsu into a sleep so profound he could not wake from it. And while Apsu slept, Ea killed him. He then built his own home on top of what had been Apsu, building civilization, literally on top of the defeated and absorbed primordial freshwater, the way every human settlement along the rivers of ancient Mesopotamia was built on top of a managed and controlled water source. He moved in. He made it comfortable. He and his wife had a son, and that son was Marduk, the birth of Marduk. This child, born in a house built on the body of the slain primordial freshwater god, was not an ordinary divine child. The text describe his birth in terms of radiance and excess, for eyes, for ears, so that he could see in every direction and hear everything said in the world at once. Fire came from his lips when he spoke. He was enormous even as an infant. He was, the texts say with unmistakable intentionality, simply more than anyone else, more than any god who had come before him, more than any god existing at the time of his birth, a being whose scale and power simply did not fit inside the categories that had previously defined what a god could be. His grandfather Anu, god of the sky, loved him extravagantly and gave him gifts for winds to play with, to carry in his hands, to do with as he wished. And Marduk, being a child, played with them. He set the wind spinning. He created storms and whirlwinds and turbulent waves wherever the winds touched the primordial ocean. And the primordial ocean was, of course, still Tiamat, still conscious, still present. Now she could not rest either. When Tiamat chose war, the other gods, the old ones, those of the earlier generations who predated even Ea, began to press Tiamat. You have been patient long enough, they told her. Apsu, the one who lay beside you from the very beginning, has been murdered, and you did nothing. Your waters are disturbed, and you say nothing. You are the primordial ocean. You are the mother of all of us. Rise, fight, end this. And Tiamat, who had once refused Apsu's plan to kill the young gods, now made a different choice. Perhaps because Apsu was gone and his death demanded an answer. Perhaps because the winds Marduk played with truly had made her waters too turbulent to endure. Perhaps because the old gods who came to her with their grievances represented something real, a generation that had been created and then superseded, made and then outgrown, left behind by their own children's increasing power, and who had nowhere else to bring their anger. She chose war. She organized her forces with thoroughness the Enuma Elish describes in careful, almost military detail. She made monsters, 11 kinds of them, including enormous serpents, dragons, and hybrid creatures of terrible strength and terrifying appearance, and she armed them with weapons and stationed them in her army alongside the older gods who had rallied to her cause. She took a husband from among the gods, a being named Kingu, and she promoted him above all others, placing the tablet of destinies around his chest, a cosmic object that conferred supreme authority over the fate of the world on whoever possessed it, and named him her champion and her general. She was not a wounded, reactive creature lashing out blindly. She was the primordial ocean assembling itself for a specific, organized, and catastrophically powerful act of war against everything that had come after it. The gods choose Marduk. The younger gods were afraid. The texts do not soften this. The first god they sent to face Tiamat was Ea himself, Marduk's father, the cleverest of all of them, the one who had so effortlessly dealt with Apsu. He approached the edge of what Tiamat was preparing, looked at the scale of it, and retreated without engaging. Then Anu, god of the sky, was sent. He too came back, shaken and unwilling. And finally, in their fear and their need, the gods of the assembly turned to the child who had been born in the house built on Apsu's body, the one with 4 eyes and 4 ears and fire on his lips. They turned to Marduk. Marduk agreed to face Tiamat, but he did not agree for free. He told the gods his price before he would accept a commission. If he defeated Tiamat, he would be supreme. His word would be law over the entire cosmos. Whatever he decreed would be fixed in place, unalterable, permanent. Every god in the assembly would bow to his authority forever after. The gods agreed. They set up a throne for him. They declared him king of the gods. Then Marduk prepared for war. He armed himself with weapons of overwhelming force, a great net given to him by his father Ea, for winds to serve as weapons, a bow in his quiver, lightning, a floodstorm, and particular wind called the Imhulu, the evil wind, that he would drive directly into Tiamat at the moment of battle. He harnessed a chariot of terrifying aspect, and he rode to the place where Tiamat and her assembled forces waited. The battle at the origin of everything. Tiamat and Marduk faced each other across the chaos of the primordial battlefield, and there was a moment before the fighting began where they spoke. Marduk challenged her. Tiamat responded. The texts describe her as casting spells and speaking word to power, and they describe Marduk as essentially holding his own against her magic, neither one immediately overwhelming the other at the level of words and will alone. Then Marduk released Imhulu, the evil wind, and drove it into Tiamat's open mouth. The great ocean could not close her mouth. The wind held it open, expanding her, filling her with a force she could not contain or expel. Her body distended with it. And in that moment, Marduk drove his spear through her, splitting her open, piercing the heart of the primordial ocean itself, and Tiamat, The salt water, the origin, the mother who had first refused to kill the young gods who disturb her rest, and then been pushed past refusal into catastrophic war, was dead, her army scattered. Kingu was captured. The tablet of destinies was taken from his chest and placed around Marduk's own neck. The 11 monsters were bound and placed on display. Their images later carved above the gate of Ea's temple as a permanent monument to what had been overcome. And then Marduk stood over the body of the primordial ocean, and he looked at what he had done, and he began to build a world built from a body. He split Tiamat's body in two. From one half, he made the sky, stretching the primordial salt ocean into a canopy overhead, using its waters as the heavens, placing guards at its edges to make sure the waters did not escape downward again. From the other half, he made the earth. He fixed her eyes as the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. He organized the stars, assigning each deity a station in the sky. He set the moon to govern the nights. He established a calendar from the movements of the heavenly bodies, fixing time itself into the structure of what had been her body. Everything ordered, everything placed, everything governed. A cosmos built from the inside of the one who had been the cosmos in its undivided, undifferentiated, primordial state. And then the gods asked for something more. They were tired, they said, of the labor of keeping the cosmos running. They wanted relief from the constant work of maintaining the world Marduk had made from Tiamat's body. They wanted servants. Marduk consulted his father Ea, and together they made a decision. Kingu, the general Tiamat had elevated, the one who had worn the tablet of destinies, was killed. His blood was mixed with clay, and from the blood of Tiamat's defeated champion, mixed with the clay of the earth that was itself Tiamat's body, Ea shaped human beings, to bear the labor the gods wanted freed from, to maintain the temples, to offer the sacrifices, to do the work that allowed the divine world to rest. This is where humanity comes from. In the oldest written creation story after the Sumerian accounts, we explored in the story of Inanna and in the origins behind Gilgamesh. Not formed lovingly from mud by a grieving, lonely goddess. Not born from the body of a sleeping giant. Made from the blood of a defeated god and the clay of a dead ocean, for the specific purpose of doing the work the victorious gods did not want to do themselves. What this enormous story is really about. I want you to notice something about Tiamat that the story itself subtly undercuts but cannot quite erase. She is always called a monster in later tellings. The dragon, the chaos creature, the ancient evil that Marduk heroically defeated so that order could emerge. This is how the Babylonians who preserved this text use their story as a foundation myth of supremacy of Marduk, patron god of Babylon, whose victory over Tiamat was reenacted ceremonially every new year as a way of confirming that order had once again defeated chaos, that the world held, that the cosmic victory was still valid and still in force. But read the text carefully, and something else is visible underneath that use of her story. Tiamat was there first, before any god, before any act of creation, before any cosmos. She and Apsu were the entire world in its original state, and everything that came after, every god, every divine generation, every act of making and unmaking, came from her waters. She resisted the first proposal to commit mass murder against the young gods. She held out against the pressure to retaliate when Apsu was killed. She endured the storms Marduk played with when he was a child, using her own body as a toy. She was pushed and pushed and pushed by forces both inside and outside her before she finally chose to fight. And when she chose to fight, she fought with total commitment, building an army, elevating a general, arming her forces, facing the enemy herself rather than sending others first. And she lost. And from her loss, everything we call the world was made. There is something in this that no amount of later triumphalism about Marduk's greatness can quite cover over. The world is not made from nothing in this story. It is made from someone. Specifically, from the original being who existed before anyone else, who was a primordial mother of the divine lineage that eventually destroyed her, and whose body was then used to build the very cosmos that the gods who killed her proceeded to inhabit and rule. Every time the rivers ran in ancient Mesopotamia, and the Tigris and Euphrates were the literal lifeblood of Mesopotamian civilization, the foundation of every city, every crop, every human community in that world, they ran from Tiamat's eyes. Every time the stars were fixed in their stations, those stations were fixed in Tiamat's body. The sky overhead was her. The earth below was her. The gods who lived and ruled in the world they built from her destruction lived inside her, always, whether they acknowledged it or not. Why she endures. The Enuma Elish was recited in full at the Babylonian New Year festival for centuries. The story of Tiamat and Marduk was not told once and forgotten. It was performed repeatedly, officially, as a civic and religious ritual, because the people who told it understood something important. The order of the world is not automatic. It has to be reestablished, reconfirmed, reenacted. Chaos is not something that was defeated once and then gone forever. It is the original state of things, the state that existed before the world was organized, and it remains present always, just beyond the edge of the organized cosmos, held back by the continued maintenance of the structures built from Tiamat's body. Every flood that devastated a Mesopotamian city, and floods were frequent, catastrophic, and deeply real in the flat lands of the Tigris-Euphrates Delta, was understood in this worldview as Tiamat's waters finding a crack in the structure Marduk had made from her body. Every drought, every storm, every collapse of the organized world back toward undifferentiated chaos was a reminder that what Marduk had built from her body was not permanent but maintained, held in shape by ceremony and effort and attention, the same way a river dike is held in shape by continuous labor, and which fails the moment that labor stops. The monster, in this oldest of dragon-slaying stories, was never simply a monster. She was the ocean. She was the origin. She was what existed before the world began and what waits. Patient and undifferentiated, at the edges of every organized thing that human beings or their gods have ever managed to build. And the world they built from her body is, in the end, still hers. Ancient stories. Eternal truth. This has been SERA Mythology.